All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the pre-school classroom session here this evening. My name's Fraser. I'm the one who sends you all the emails. Look forward to meeting all of you on Saturday morning, bright and early. And hope you have a great attendance tonight and look forward to seeing you, like I said, again on Saturday. I'm going to turn the reins over to Adam, classroom instructor for the evening, and then again, look forward to seeing everyone Saturday morning, bright and early, dress appropriate. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Fraser. So welcome to the, classroom session for our autocross school for the National Capital Chapter BMW Car Club of America. I'm Adam Shalakowski, your host, and as well as your instructor for the evening. So who am I? Based on autocrosser that started back, 22 years ago now. And I've been teaching autocross since 2005. I've competed in several different classes, front wheel drive, rear, all wheel, etc. Won several of them, and I've been a committee mentor since 2004. So that's either involved with renting lots, setting up, and nowadays I'm more involved on the school side of things, obviously presenting and coming up with some support for the newbies, as it were, to try to garner some more interest in this great sport. So what is autocross? At the end of the day, it's really just it's a playground session of sorts with cars, but it is in a controlled and structured environment. Therefore, we're not trying to crash your vehicles, right? So the concept is we're going through a sea of cones, which is the course itself. So it does change every single event, which is in and of itself a very nice challenge. It's supposed to be a fun event where you drive, but it's also a team thing because we have to actually help, shag cones if you're not running, and there's other responsibilities that you'll share throughout the day if it's not your turn to run on the course. And through it all, it's a social gathering, so you'll see lots of folks forge, long-term, friendships and bonds. Here's an example. So this is Eric and Lee Andreas, and they've been with the club for, I think, as long as I have, maybe even a little bit more. But they've come out for decades at this point. And then, yeah, just nice to see familiar faces, come out. So before we drive, you'll hear a lot of different, opinions about what to do. But here's a good starting point. So proper driving positions include your hands at 9 and 3. You want to sit upright, and you're also going to try to check for proper seat height and distance from the wheel. One of the things that's a little bit different when you autocross is you have to wear a helmet. So it's going to give you a couple extra inches on the top of your head, which means maybe you're too tall. You may have to adjust your seat down a little bit to give you that extra space. There's a couple different things we can talk about here that's in the picture. When your arms are stretched out, you want to make sure that you're not too close or too far from the wheel. So this diagram kind of gives you a decent representation of what we're looking for, which is when you're actually holding onto the wheel, your elbows at a 45-ish degree angle between, well, it's actually more of like 90, but you kind of get what I mean by looking at the image. For your legs, you don't want to be cramped, and you also want to make sure there's space between the steering wheel and your quadriceps. Otherwise, you may end up kind of turning the wheel and your hand hits your leg and you can't turn anymore. We don't want that either. So during the day, there'll be some instructors around to give you a little more setup advice and some aid here if you don't remember the slide. The seatbelt trick, so I'll explain that one briefly because they may not cover it. Basically, when you're driving an autocross, you're going to be thrown around the vehicle, right? Because you're going at reasonably high speeds, experiencing some good G forces. If you move your seat farther forward, put your seatbelt on, and then yank on it until it locks, and then you kind of move your seat back to where it would normally be in a good driving position, it actually locks that seatbelt against you very firmly, much like basically a race like harness. So that's a good trick to keep you a little more situated for moving around. And the helmet check is really just you shouldn't be able to take it off above your ears kind of thing. Questions about kind of just a general setup advice? There'll also be a Q&A at the end, so if something comes up later on, feel free to chime in either in the chat or you can take yourself off mute and ask away. All right, so a few slides ago, I mentioned cones. So these are the things that are going to provide you with course guidance and boundaries to really let you know where you're supposed to go, as well as where you're not supposed to go. In terms of the autocross and the race itself, there's things that happen if you actually hit a cone. It could be a penalty, depending on where the cone ends up. It may not be a penalty. And if you hit some end cones after the start or after the finish, that might be a DNF. So you do not finish, basically. So the image is in the kind of the bottom right. You have a couple examples of cone placements where you might have hit them with your car. Sometimes the cone literally does fall directly where it was. So that's the top left image. Sometimes you might scoot it a little bit. It's still predominantly inside the box, touching the lines that are going to be chalked on the outside, so we know where to put the cone back. You're still good, so there's no penalties for those first two. That last one is kind of barely touching that outside line of, I guess, the chalk, we'll call it. That's still okay, so no penalties there. If it's knocked over inside or outside that designated area, that's going to be a penalty. And when it's a penalty, we're talking about a 2-second time penalty. So it's enough where if you do hit it and you're trying to cut a corner, you're not going to gain anything by doing it. So realistically, we do want to avoid cones. And the last one is just kind of a funny picture where sometimes the cone does get stuck in your wheel well or underneath the car. Sometimes you have to come to a complete stop and reverse, and that'll actually get the cone out. Having said that, that's not something you do on course unless you've like spun the vehicle. Okay, you want to keep going because we are sending cars out like one after the other with space so they can finish without running into each other. But you don't want to hold up the entire event just because you're dragging a cone. We'll take care of it once you finish. Course workers. So as I mentioned earlier, it isn't just about driving. We have kind of our own part to play. So what do course workers ultimately do? We help keep the event moving safely. If you're one of the people that hit 12 cones, that means the person behind you may come at you very quickly, and we need course workers to place those cones back where they're supposed to go before they show up to that particular section of the course. If that's not possible, if you see the gentleman on the right side of the screen right now, he is holding a red flag. We may need to utilize that to make sure that the next car doesn't come and hit course workers and things. A lot of that will be explained a little more in detail, I guess, over the weekend. So that's the whole shagging cones piece. Also at work, these kind of corner stations, if you will, you'll call them penalties. So it's important that you're looking at the cones and not the cars as they go by. It's really about seeing what is going on with the course. That's ultimately a course worker's responsibility. Obviously, you want to pay attention to a vehicle so it's not hitting yourself or others, but you don't want to just kind of be looking, oh, how fast they're going and really taking that in versus, oh, they knocked over 3 cones. You didn't notice. Then on the radio, you're getting yelled at by someone else saying, hey, pick up the cones. There's cones down. You don't want to be that guy. When you call in penalties, you want to call the number of cones as well as the car number if you can. Now the cones in the bottom, there's 2 pointer cones, is what we call them. Those cones don't actually count for the penalties. It's only the one that's standing up. The ones on the ground are more of like a visual guide to help you understand to go to a specific side of the cone, so they don't count against you. So if there's someone more experienced at the corner station, you can always kind of, I guess, rely on them to make the proper decision, but we can kind of figure it out later if the incorrect call does come in. We talked about course awareness briefly. So red flag I talked about. We also have extinguishers. We haven't, as far as I remember, used them on course, but they are there in case a vehicle catches fire for whatever reason. If you don't know how to use an extinguisher, oh, one second, my daughter's home. Pull, aim, squeeze, and sweep is how you use an extinguisher. So pull the trigger, pull the pin, aim, squeeze the trigger, then sweep across the fire in case you did come across that. Unsafe course conditions. So occasionally wheels fall off vehicles because they forgot to torque them down. Some people will bring race tires to events. We did have that happen at least once that I remember. That would be a red flag situation, and obviously we'd want to pause the event to make sure we can get the car off safely without harming anyone. Flag. If you are at the course at the corner and you're holding the flag, you want to hold it in your hand, kind of furled, not unfurled, because if it's waving in the wind or something, it may kind of catch a driver's eye and then they try to stop. With the flag also, you want to wave in big circles. Don't just kind of hold it there and kind of whatever, but you do want to make sure that you're trying to make eye contact with that driver so they see the flag. So if you want to come out a little bit, not directly in front of the car, please don't do that. But just enough where there's kind of like, oh, what is that? And the driver will look over and kind of see something. That's kind of what we're looking to do because we want to prevent whatever accident or issues happening ahead of them want to make sure they don't actually get all the way to it. Question on course workers, and again, it'll be covered more over the weekend. All right, so course elements. So an autocross isn't just like a, hey, you start here and you go there. There's different components to kind of make it up, which force you to drive a certain way, either a direction. Sometimes you go through a direction multiple times, or you have to make a decision and go on a specific side of a cone. There's all sorts of cool course elements that we can kind of create each event to make it feel kind of unique. So the image on the right gives you kind of an idea of what a course may look like. This will be probably too short, honestly, for a course, but you can kind of see you have the start cones here. So you have here and here, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's what a course at the start's going to look like. You'll have a guy, like a course worker next to you here, or on this side, doesn't really matter. Basically saying, hey, pull up, stop, and then they'll let you know when to go. So always pay attention to that starter. Pointer cones, I mentioned this earlier. So this designates you have to travel on this side of the cone. If you go on the opposite side, you're going to be off course, and that means your time won't count. The next course element is called a gate. This is something you have to go through. If you happen to, let's say, drive your car, hit the cone on this side, and you keep going, you made the gate officially, so you're not off course, but you do pick up a time penalty of 2 seconds for hitting that cone. Presumably, it's not going to be in place anymore if you whack it. This guy here, it's again, just kind of a wall of cones. It's basically a bigger gate. That's all that guy is. This pointer cone here signifies, again, you have to go on a specific side of that cone. And then if you notice, the rest of the cones do not have pointer cones anymore. What this means is you have to basically alternate which side of the cones you go on. So if you enter here on the left, you'll be on the right of the next one, so on and so forth. Occasionally, we'll have slaloms that don't have a pointer cone at the start. That means you can actually go on either side of them. There's usually a faster way to go, and that's something that you have to kind of figure out on your own on the course. This is, again, just kind of a pointer cone with like a little wall kind of designating you can't go inside of it. Same thing here. So it's kind of like a mini slalom here with some extra cones, same kind of difference. A sweeper is kind of this longer turn here. So you have a gate and then another gate technically, but effectively it's really just you sweep through the whole thing. So you almost don't even really pay attention to some of these cones because of how you're positioning your vehicle through. There's a clamshell. I really just call it pointer cone. This is just your outside barrier. Same thing here. So instead of being able to go way out wide, you have to stay a little bit tighter. So again, it becomes like a slalom gate situation. A Chicago box is this larger thing here where you actually have a wall of cones and all of these guys count if you do hit them for time penalties. Again, it's just a device which kind of visually tries to trick you a little bit. The last thing is really just like a pivot cone. And again, it's really just a cone. It could be a pointer cone. It could just be a single standalone cone or two or a gate. Again, you drive around it and then your finish will look like this. DNFs, if you hit these cones over here, these are going to be called DNFs. So don't do that. When you come through, in general, you don't have to come to a complete stop. We ask you guys to slow down a lot to make sure that you're obviously under control and make sure that there's nothing else going on in this space. Sometimes cars have actually broken down in this finish area, so we got to make sure that you're keeping an eye out for that. If we have course workers at the end, they'll red flag probably over here if there was some sort of safety concern with that. So course elements, we kind of reviewed what they are, but be aware that everyone's car as well as your skill levels will be a little bit different. So sometimes folks may be really, really good at a slalom and really feel that car balance and be able to go through very quickly. Others may not. It also depends on how your car is set up. Maybe you have more tire pressure in the front versus the rear. That makes your vehicle handle a certain way, and it'll make these elements feel differently as you try to go through them. At the end of the day, it's important just to remember where to go. So your first time out, you'll probably be very intimidated by the cones out there because, as remember a couple slides ago, I said it's a sea of cones. It does look confusing. So we do a course walk before we actually go out on the course. And that way it tries to familiarize yourself with where you're supposed to go. But like anything else, it's a skill that you have to kind of train and teach. So the more you come out, the easier it'll be to really plan for a proper racing line. Questions on this slide? You guys are making this too easy. Hi, Alexander. You just hopped in, so we are recording the meeting. So you missed the first few minutes, but you'll be able to watch what you missed at a later time. Hopefully you can hear me. John, do you have a
Adam,
question? Yeah.
a question on there's 3 laid down cones in the lower right-hand corner of the screen.
Yep,
I
these guys.
think those are just pointers to get you going to the next gate.
Yeah, so if you're coming through here, when you look up, what you're going to see is basically this, well, it's really like you said, they're lying down. So it's a lying down wall of cones. Basically, it says go this way. If you hit them, nothing happens. But it's basically saying, hey, you need to get over to this gate right here. So oftentimes, autocross is really about looking up, and that's, I'll mention a little bit later. You're not looking where you are. So if my car was right, let's say right here, right at this little guy here, I'm already looking at this sweeper way over here. So I'm trying to plan how I can get my car from here to here. So this cone, this kind of gate, I've already kind of calculated. It's really about, I don't want to be over here at some point. So realistically, once you kind of get good at it, you don't even really notice a lot of the stuff because you've already walked the course. But yeah, this is a visual indicator just saying, hey, go that way. Same thing with these guys, same kind of principle here. Good question.
We'll be getting a course map.
We don't really have course maps per se. What we'll do is we have, like I said, I mentioned earlier, all the courses change basically each event. So you'll get an opportunity to walk the course. And usually you can do it like a couple times actually, because we give quite a bit of time. There's also a guided walkthrough. So one of the instructors will actually walk everyone through it and talk about some of the different zones and areas and elements within that course to help you kind of everyone say, hey, here's a kind of a problem area. It may be a little confusing. We're going to go this way. That's how it's usually handled. We don't hand out like maps per se.
I guess that's part of the challenge, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So it's, yeah, learning the course is definitely a skill. Some people are better than others for sure. But at the end of the day, it's not very long. So once you drive it at least once, you should be good to go. Great questions. Anything else?
One question.
Sure.
I was checking the weather and where it's expected to basically rain all day. That'll make things a lot interesting, right?
Yes and no. So we can kind of consider rain as the great equalizer, right? So people typically with really fast cars and sticky tires, you'd expect them to win all the time. But in slippery conditions where there's less traction available to you, it really evens out the car situation and really exposes the good drivers from the bad. We're also using a skid pad. I'll show you guys a map a little bit later, so it'll actually make that a lot easier to use on the tires in the car, so you can kind of break traction a bit earlier and kind of experience hopefully understeer and oversteer. But yeah, it does make it interesting. It can be a little bit annoying if you're kind of sitting outside in the rain and because you can't exactly hold umbrellas all the time, right? Depending on where you are and what you're doing. But it's a welcome challenge. I always loved rain events personally. Anything else? All right. So vehicle dynamics and autocross. So the biggest thing with any sort of racing environment is understanding what your car is doing. Sometimes you hear people say you drive, and you feel through your butt, kind of through the seat. You can really, if you're sharp and really paying attention, you can really feel what the car is doing beneath you through that experience. But there is something to be said about anticipation versus that feeling. Like you should be able to feel, obviously oversteer versus understeer. But before that even happens, you should sort of anticipate it kind of because you know the limits of your vehicle, hopefully. And if you've never kind of pushed your vehicle that far, then that's kind of why you're coming to the school to start to learn those limits and anticipate, what your car can and cannot do. You heard me mention earlier, both understeer and oversteer. I haven't really mentioned traction too much. So this is going to be a concept around, hey, your tire has 100% available traction to do different things. Maybe you're trying to accelerate and turn, maybe you're braking and turning. These are all inefficient things. So I will spend a slide or so talking about some of that. So understeer. What is understeer? Simply, it's a lack of front end grip. So let's say in this example, we're turning right, but the car is actually not turning right. It's going to be going straight. That experience and that feeling is called understeer. The majority of vehicles today are actually geared towards understeer because it's sort of safer. You're not going to be spinning around in circles like you would be with oversteer. What causes it? You're trying to steer too much or too quickly, basically just going too fast for whatever turn you're trying to make. What can you do to minimize it? Basically slow down. That's gonna be the big thing. You'll be able to experience this on the wet skid pad this weekend. It's really a feeling about, hey, I can turn in this much. Oh, I turned in too much. I'm understeering. At that situation, you want to open up the wheel a little bit and then kind of turn back into that direction of travel that you want. But it's a very challenging thing to kind of get around. You'll hear announcers in different series of racing kind of talk about, oh, we don't want understeering the vehicle in the race car, and it's horrible. For me personally, I'd much rather have a little bit of oversteer because I can kind of control that and throttle steer with it. But understeer is kind of a very much a limiting factor, right, of speed. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have oversteer, which is lack of rear end grip. So you're turning right, and then you are turning right, but now the rear of your vehicle is actually going to the left. And this is where you have those situations of a possible spin occurring. Different causes. You can kind of, if you floor it, you could just spin around. If you brake and turn, sometimes you'll unload the weight of the vehicle in the rear, and that'll cause the rear of the vehicle to spin around, especially in, let's say, a 911 where the engine is in the back. So it effectively acts as a pendulum. If you're in the middle of a sweeper and then you lift, you're again unloading the wheels in the rear, so the weight moves to the front. And because the rear is unloaded, you can have some oversteer situations there as well. You'll hear a term called countersteer. Basically, you're going to want to turn in the opposite direction of whatever oversteer situation you're having. So per this picture, right now, if we continue to keep the wheels to the right, you're not going to really helping your cause. You need to actually swing those wheels to the left, which is the direction of your slide, to basically countersteer that oversteer and then hopefully get the car under control. The last note here is neutral throttle. So if you're trying to give it gas, you're pumping the gas while you're oversteering, that can again unsettle the vehicle. It makes it very difficult to control. If you keep it more neutral, so you're not really accelerating or decelerating, that gives you the best chance of, we'll call it survival, so you can get the car pointed back in a straight line. Any questions on understeer, oversteer?
Um, I have heard that at least in a front wheel drive car, um, when you're in an oversteer situation, you kind of want to point the wheels to where you want to go and just give it the beans. How true is that?
Depends on the vehicle and how it's set up. So if you have enough front end grip, it'll kind of help you get you where you want to go. But again, lifting is unloading the rear wheel, so it kind of makes it worse, right? So if you give it the beans, though, you're gonna be overdriving the tires, and that's actually this slide here. But that's not ideal either. There's kind of a fine balance. You don't want to just floor it and hope for the best. But generally, giving it more gas in a front-wheel drive vehicle will help. But again, there's lots of caveats, I guess I'll say with that.
Understood.
All right, so we're kind of leading into this with that question. Here's this kind of idea of available traction in the friction circle. So what is friction? That's obviously, how much grip you have. And that's basically your tires touching the ground. When your tires are doing more than one thing, you're basically making it a lot harder, for your vehicle. So what do I mean by that? You have 100% available traction, right, from your tire. If you're asking it to accelerate, and that's all you're asking it to do, 100% of your traction is available to your tire. If you're trying to turn and accelerate, now all of a sudden you won't be able to accelerate as well. So you may have some slippage and some sliding up the tires because you're asking it to turn in addition to accelerate. So it's kind of like if you see on the left side here, it's talking about a budget. So if our budget's 100%, you want to try to maximize that as best you can. So if you're in a really high speed corner and all of a sudden you hit your brakes, you're going to experience a loss of traction because you took away from your budget. At the end of the day, it's kind of finding, I guess, that balance between the two. And it's extremely difficult to kind of walk that line. And that's why you see people at these schools, you see people trying to get extra seat time, doing fun runs and things to really get as much practice as possible to get as familiar as they can with their vehicle and understanding and anticipating, how far they can really push it. General things with the friction circle, understand that tires have more grip and there's more weight there. So in the previous few minutes, I've mentioned when you unload the rear of the car, the weight transfer goes from the back to the front. So if there's less weight on the back tires, right, you're losing that friction, thus that traction. Picture in the bottom right, we'll talk about this a little bit. If you are, let's say, at the limit of your tires available traction and you start to floor it, regardless if it's front or rear, you're going to start to understeer and go to the left instead of actually turning right. The image here kind of gives you an idea of the percentage, I guess, each tire is working to kind of get around that corner. So if you notice, the bubble in the bottom left is the biggest because that's where most of the pressure is for this turn, if you're on the gas. If you're kind of going into it and hitting your brakes, that big kind of blob of green on the left and the rear will actually be in the front, which technically means you have a little more kind of initial turn in or bite for that corner. So that's when you can kind of utilize braking to give you the ability to turn. Give me 1 second. All right, any questions on this? Kind of some physics here. All right, one thing to note on the left, we talk about temperature. Some tires have a limit to how hot they can get, such as race tires. So if you just did a 360 spin, it's possible that you basically overheated your tires and have no more grip. That's something you need to understand of your vehicle and your tires and actually cool them down. So kind of understand, again, what your equipment is, be familiar with your vehicle. And of course, if you have any questions with tires and tire pressures, feel free to ask instructors over the weekend. All right, racing line and apex. So the racing line, there's usually an ideal one. Sometimes it does vary from car to car. So, you brought up that comment about front wheel drive earlier. Sometimes that turn in our line will be a little bit different for front versus rear versus all. But in general, they're pretty close, at least the way that we generally design our courses. If you look in the left image, it kind of shows you a preferred smooth line. The red line is very jagged and sharp, so you're not carrying as much speed around those course elements. In general, you want to kind of swing wide and allow the car to really sweep through things as opposed to cutting and really being tight with stuff. So you'll hear people kind of say, oh, you're pinching a turn or a corner. That's this red line here, and that's going to be slow. Right image is an idea of kind of where an apex is supposed to be. If you have a late apex versus the geometrical apex versus an early turn in, it kind of shows you how early or how late you could actually get on the gas. Any questions on this slide? And I hope you guys have a question about apex.
So I'm curious. Geoline versus late apex. I feel like there's some room there to play as far as which one would be, quote, optimal, depending on your car setup.
Exactly. So it depends on, what's obviously after. And in this image, it's pretty standard. It's just a 90-degree right turn. But, let's say we had to actually all of a sudden turn. Let's say there's a cone here, okay, right under here. So if you're trying to full speed, whatever line you're taking, but you need to go over here, probably late apexing it doesn't make the most sense just because of where you want to go. but it just depends. Like sometimes it might be a little off camber here, or it might be slick. Maybe your suspension doesn't have enough time to kind of transition, right? And you kind of have to really feel what the car is doing. But in general, the green line is going to be a good starting point. And then you can kind of play with your runs and see, hey, if I turn in later, is that faster? Or if I actually turn in real early and let the car kind of come out too far, maybe that's decent because maybe there's a cone that's actually way out here, so you can actually carry more speed. But in this case, pretend this is a cone or a wall of cones here, right? If you're trying to do an early turn, you're so tight to this corner, you can't really sweep across it, you know, right? Per this example, you're going to be hitting cones and kind of out of shape, right? In general. But you kind of hit it, you know, spot on, right? Where it does depend. There's so many question marks around each and every corner or also course element in an autocross course where you really have to get some seat time and figure it out on your own. But great question. All right, move on to the next slide. So just talking about a few tips and tricks for you guys. I mentioned this already, you know, looking, you know, several gates ahead. When you're doing your course walk, it's important that you kind of jot down in your mind, or you can even take a notebook, honestly, you know, where maybe some problem areas are or some areas of uncertainty, right? When you're walking it, you're like, is it faster to go, you know, late apex here, early apex there? You know, how does the car actually transition through this section? And ultimately you don't know, right, until you drive it. Like in our heads, you know, we have an idea of how the car is going to handle and move, but up until you're actually on the course, you really don't know. Like, are your tire pressures up to temp? Yeah, it's, again, so many different things go into it. Maybe one, you know, run you're a little bit smoother than another. Maybe one run you have a passenger co-pilot, right? So all of a sudden that extra weight is doing something in your vehicle. When you're driving and let's say you actually do spin or you're starting to spin, feel free to try to save it. That's cool. But be aware of your surroundings. If you're trying to save it by a pole, it's probably not the greatest idea in the world. Where we are this weekend, that won't be an issue. But some of the events and lots we do utilize will be some areas where if you're going horrifically off course, you could find yourself in a bad spot. So it's always good to kind of think and say, you know what, 2 feet in if you have a clutch. Otherwise, if you just have an automatic, just stand on the brake, let the car come to a complete stop, and then kind of continue on your merry way. Always look for your out. Oftentimes, people will fixate on something that they want to avoid. We'll stick with the pole example. If you're staring at a pole, you're probably going to hit it. You want to steer and look somewhere besides that pole, and you'll actually end up seeing that your car goes where you want it to. Grass is bad. If you end up on the grass, if you're going slow, you're okay. But if you're at speed, you definitely don't want to try to keep turning and right. Oh, I'm turning left and there's grass on my right. Don't try to keep turning left because the moment you hit that grass, if it's really pitched left, your tire can dig into that grass and your car will flip. Slow in, fast out. So that's the whole apex thing. So in general, you want to kind of slow down for the apex and accelerate out of it. If you remember a couple slides ago, so it talked about being short, shortest distance is fastest. Again, there's a caveat. Even though this little red line is the shortest distance between the cones, because of the layout, it's going to be slower because you can carry so much more momentum with your vehicle and so much more cornering speed if you kind of swing out wide a little bit more in each of these sections. All right. So that kind of pretty much concludes the kind of school portion for the autocross. Any questions, comments, concerns before we kind of move towards some more housekeeping stuff? I guess I was kind of biased to my 911. It was a pretty big challenge just because of where the engine was, so it handles significantly differently than other cars. I say my least favorite's probably all-wheel drive, just because they tend to understeer a lot. I mean, if you can dial it out with suspension and tires and things of that nature, but I think rear-wheel drive cars and rear engine was kind of my best experience. All seasons can be okay. Obviously, there's your tires are your limiting factor, right? So there would help you stop, start, and turn. You'll be very loud on all seasons, but it's a good experience because since your speeds will generally be lower, it'll kind of keep you out of trouble, and also you'll start to experience like understeer and oversteer a little bit easier at that lower speed, so it's easier to kind of catch and control. Let's see, I'm trying to remember. Gosh, it was probably 15 years ago. I ended up getting a flat tire, and I tried to autocross with 3 summer tires and then 1 all season because all I could get my hands on, and I just did it for fun at that point. But it was challenging, right? You know, all seasons are, I call them no seasons, right? Because they're not really great at anything. But it's definitely fine. You know, you're not going to be unhappy with it because you're still going to be running around. No, overheat, no, because so all seasons are not going to overheat really. Yeah, you're gonna be good there. Snows will overheat if you had snow tires on. That could be a problem, but with all seasons, no, you'll be 100% okay. Yeah, you do not need summer tires. You don't need race tires. You'll be a-okay. Come on, give me some more questions. Usually I get a bunch more. Yeah, track days are fun. Honestly, if it's like your first time doing track, it really doesn't even matter what tires you're on because you're not going to be pushing the vehicle anywhere near the limit. But yeah, track days are, if you do like a true track day, it's not like they have cone things off for you. That's a really neat experience because you get to do the same lap over and over. So there's a lot more kind of seat time doing the same thing. So you really get to get a good feel for it. Autocross, I would consider a different type of challenge because you only get a few tries, right? You only get, we'll call them 5 laps or so, around the autocross, course. And so with about, I don't know, a few minutes between runs, you don't have a whole lot of seat time really to kind of fix your mistakes or find a new line. So it really, really is more difficult from that perspective. A track, there's so much more margin in terms of your speed, your cornering speed, and everything that it's a very different experience. But I've done both, so yeah, having super sticky tires is so much fun. Anything else? Yeah, so I didn't really go into it too much, but there are classes that we have for autocross, whether that's through BMW, SCCA, or anyone else. Generally speaking, there are limits to keep you in like a stock class versus a modified class. Off the top of my head, I don't know what that number is. I feel like it might be 200 or something like that. But as we all know, treadwear levels are made up. There's no actual standardized classification, right, for these things. Like you could say my tire is 200, but it could be 400 for someone else or 150 for someone else. But in general, the lower the number, the stickier the tire. Anything else? All right. So once you guys get to the event, so basically pull up to the front of Summit Point, the skid pad and where you guys are going to be are in the back area over here. Once you arrive, there'll actually be a guy at the gate. They'll tell you where to go. You'll sign a waiver. It's very easy. They'll also kind of tell you to follow like basically a painted line on the ground. It'll tell you where to go effectively. Just follow that line all the way around and you'll eventually find your way to where you need to go. You just show up and say, hey, I'm with the BMW event, and they'll say BMW Autocross. Sometimes there are actual BMW club racing events and things, so be clear. There shouldn't be an issue there. I'll kind of talk about this real quick. So here's a skid pad you guys will use. So everyone will have an opportunity to go around this and kind of experience hopefully understeer and oversteer. In the morning, you guys will also be doing some figure 8 drills as well as some slaloms down in the larger lot here. In the afternoon, so after lunch, you guys will break and have an actual kind of, I guess, mock autocross, I'll call it. So you actually have, the whole concept of working the course, driving the course, really experiencing what an event should feel like if you come to the actual points events later in the year. All right, so that was kind of the housekeeping stuff. Just want to make sure that you guys feel reasonably comfortable with where to go and also what to expect over the weekend. Last chance for questions, comments, or concerns. All right, Jeff, you have anything to add?
One thing when you are looking for the site, there's a first gate there that's going to be closed. You'll see people, you'll see through the gate and see the course. Go past that one. You're going to enter at the far end of the course. That can be pretty confusing when it's early.
Yep, thanks, Jeff. So the min and max speeds will vary depending upon what lot we're in, as well as the course design we kind of choose for that day. In general, second gear is a good sweet spot. Sometimes you might reach third. I think I've been in fourth maybe once. For kind of beginners and such, because once you're out of first, keeping in second, that'll kind of get you where you need to go. There are certain courses where dropping in a first may be an advantage, but as you're just starting out, it's really just a better idea to keep it in two and worry about your driving, your line and all of that. Minimum speeds, obviously 0 at the start. Some slower corners could be in the teens, or even single digits. Otherwise, I'd say average, maybe 20 to 25 overall, if you put it all together. Jacks, whatever. So, I mean, your car usually comes, well, I guess they don't always come with jacks now anymore because no one has spare tires. People will bring their actual race tires and they'll bring basically a floor jack to change tires. You really don't need to bring much. Maybe an air compressor, a portable one, something like a tire gauge to check your pressures, maybe some oil to top off is usually a good idea. Water will provide, maybe a small umbrella. You might want to use that this weekend, and we can kind of find some areas where you may be able to use it, because we don't want everyone, if they're working on the course, just holding an umbrella the whole time. That could be dangerous, especially if there's wind. Jeff, anything else you think they would want to bring or show up with?
Yeah, I'd say we definitely don't encourage the use of umbrellas when you're working the course.
Right.
A lot better to have a raincoat so you can just sprint around and do whatever you need to do.
Yep, exactly.
Where are the temperatures, man? If it's windy, the wind can really cook across that thing. So I bring way more clothing than I ever need, but it's handy to have. You can always pack it away in a box or something, and it's better to be comfortable when you're out there for an extended period watching other people drive.
I think one time a change of socks was something that I wish I had. On one of those rainy days, yeah. So yeah, you can do that. So we do have chalk, right? Because we'll chalk off the cones on the course so we can put them back. You can borrow said chalk or bring your own. Let's see. You can also, so for numbers, if you bring, we'll also have this, but if you have magnetic numbers you want to put on your car, that's cool. Tape on windows is also something that we'll allow, but we have everything like that at the site. Yeah, so normally there's an area where you'll kind of stage your vehicle for just like, hey, we're not actually running. You can unload stuff there, like spare tires, parts, bags. Some people, set up a tent. And then there'll basically be a staging area for the vehicles that are actually running, and it'll be at a different location. So yes, you'll be able to do that. Yes, I think you do. I want to say that at least for the instructors and committee members, that email already went out. I don't know much about that process, to be honest, but definitely follow up with the whole number thing for the whole season this weekend. But yeah, definitely something you can do.
right? That generally requires purchasing a season pass.
I didn't even know we had a season pass.
I don't know if we call it that, but basically it is that. One more thing, in terms of the staging area, that is when you come in at that back end of the area, there'll be a really concrete thing along the edge on the left-hand side, and we're staging stuff in the grass right behind that slippery area. That's where you'll be parking.
All right, anything else before we call it an evening? All right, well, thanks so much for your attention and questions. Hopefully you guys found it of some value, but at the end of the day, it's really about seat time. Just getting into the chair, the car, and just doing run after run, weekend after weekend, and hopefully you guys are as addicted to it as Jeff and I are. You too.
Sounds good. Looking forward to Saturday.
Great. All right, Jeff, you can probably cut it there.
Yep, sounds good. I'll see you
Awesome. Yep. Well, I won't be there actually, but I'm sure I'll see you at some point this whole year. But
All right.
anyway, take care, Jeff.
there. Yep, you too.
Later. Rain will be fun, Chris. Making that much more challenging, but it's totally worth it. All right, night, guys.